Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. Defund the police is a rallying cry that means different things to different people. But a closer look reveals there's consensus, even among some law enforcement, around some of the root problems in policing. Crosscut's Sara Bernard and David Kroman are talking about all this in the second season of the podcast, This Changes Everything. We'll hear from them in a minute. But first, let's get you caught up. The Washington State Auditor's Office says a data breach may have exposed the personal information of 1.6 million residents who filed for unemployment last year. The breach involved third-party software used by the Auditor's Office to transmit files. State Auditor Pat McCarthy says the hack could affect people who filed for unemployment between January 1st and December 10th, 2020. The data includes names, social security numbers, driver's license numbers, bank information, and place of employment. The Auditor's Office says it's working with state cybersecurity officials, law enforcement, and others to try to mitigate the damage. Seattle is forcing builders to help curb carbon emissions. Starting in June, new apartments, hotels, and commercial buildings will need to use something other than gas heat. The same ban will apply to gas-heated water by 2022. Seattle City Council unanimously approved the ban yesterday. And Yahoo Sports reports Sue Bird has decided to sign a new contract with the Seattle Storm. This would be her 18th season in the league, all of which were played in Seattle. Bird is one of the most decorated members of the WNBA. Details of her deal haven't been announced. Defund the police. It's a familiar refrain heard in Seattle. We're one of the highest profile examples of a city trying to put that idea into action. But even here, there's disagreement about what defunding the police really means. People in King County were polled in October and asked if they wanted to defund the police. Only a quarter said yes. But a lot of people support the major principles of the idea, including many police officers. That's just one of the takeaways from a new season of Crosscut's podcast, This Changes Everything. It's the second season, and it digs into the push to defund the Seattle Police Department and the broader movement to change policing. Sara Bernard is with us today. She's the producer of This Changes Everything. Hey, Sara.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And David Kroman is here as well. He's Crosscut's political reporter. Hey, David.
Hi.
Defund the police brings up a lot of emotions for people. It's certainly a lightning rod of an issue. What does it really mean when we say defund the police? What are people talking about?
Well, it means different things to different people, but I think the sort of basic premise for a lot of people who are really advocating for this is that we should maybe think about public safety differently and think about bringing money that we're giving to police departments and move it into other areas such as affordable housing and mental health care and, you know, kind of other societal issues that kind of contribute to some of the interactions that police officers have. Kind of a little bit more about reallocating resources, I guess, and less a sort of anti-police feeling. But it really depends on who you ask. But that's kind of the broadest definition for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have different interpretations of what defund the police means. And you found support for these ideas individually in some surprising places.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're highly unlikely to find a police officer who would say, I support defunding the police. But you can find plenty of police officers, and I would say almost a majority of police officers, who agree that they are taking on tasks or doing things that they never expected to do and feel like maybe they shouldn't be doing. So thinking of things like crisis response or dealing with a lot of issues related to homelessness. These are issues where if you talk to police and ask them, like, would you support moving these functions towards somebody else who maybe got into specifically that line of work, a lot of them say yes. And so in that respect, even if two different people are not both saying they support defunding the police, you find this kind of overlap between some people in law enforcement and some people who are outside law enforcement trying to change it.
You have some tape in your podcast from a former Dallas police chief named David Brown who tries to sum it up by making the point that the issues around policing are so much larger than just policing.
Schools fail. Give it to the cops. 70% of the African community is being raised by single women. Let's give it to the cops to solve that as well. That's too much to ask. Policing was never meant to solve all those problems.
So, David, I want to ask you specifically, because this is a beat that you are familiar with. There are a lot of programs that King County and the city of Seattle have that try to address these issues. The fire department has a low acuity response team that goes out to try to help people who are not connected to social services, who are in crisis. King County Best Starts for Kids program invests millions of dollars in programs to try to solve some of these issues. How are they working?
Well, I think the thing is all of these programs are very small. One person described them to me as boutique-y. In that they show promise and they're innovative and they're trying new things, and that's good and people appreciate that. But a lot of the reason why the police department is such a heavy presence is simply because they're open. They're open all the time. They have cars that drive really fast. They have a fully functioning dispatch system. And so, I think one of the major barriers between some of these small promising programs and the police department is kind of logistical. It's just these programs don't have the ability to respond immediately. They can't be on call 24/7, and they just don't have the resources to sort of meaningfully replace the police department system, which has been around now for, centuries.
I love that you called them boutique-y, because that is exactly what they are in a lot of cases. Might programs that are right now somewhat boutique-y get more funding, get more traction because of the climate that we are in? Is this a turning point?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. There have been a lot of promises to invest a lot more heavily in programs like this. I think some of the money is going to go towards creating new things at a community level, which will have its own set of complications. And then, yes, I think a lot of the money could go towards some of these programs that have existed for a while and are ready to maybe start scaling up. Again, I think there's probably this tipping point, though, that comes between taking a promising program and expanding it to include a few more clients, and to the point when we're talking about sort of legitimately replacing a significant number of police calls. And I think those two things are really different, and will take a lot of sort of tightrope walking to get to that point where those sort of boutique programs become something more akin to like a police department or a fire department.
And speaking of just how we were talking about how the sort of broader definition of defund the police, a lot of people could agree. I think that's kind of where we're at with this, is that we could look at the functions of these boutique programs and say, oh, actually, that seems to make a lot of sense. We could have social workers, medical professionals going out to take care of some of these calls that don't really have anything to do with the crime. They're more about, mental health. They're more about poverty. They're more about all these other issues that we're trying to solve as a society. And so a lot of people could kind of look at that and say, yeah, that makes sense. But then the question is, how do we get there? And so I think that's, in some ways, that's the most controversial part of this. Like, at what point do lawmakers feel secure in scaling down the police, and at what point are these other programs scaled up enough to kind of replace officers? And I feel like logistically that's kind of where it gets difficult, and also where people start to disagree too. Like, how do we get there? How does this level of change actually happen?
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, that's an excellent point, because what's really lacking in a lot of this right now is trust, right? Trust between the police and the community, and what's right and who you can trust, whose voice gets heard.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
David, City Council has supported defunding the police by 50%. Of course, in the budget for this year, it's shaped up to be about 20%. The city is also renegotiating its contract with the police union this year. Predictions? What should we be thinking about? What are you thinking about?
Well, predictions on the police contract is that will not be resolved this year, and it'll probably not be resolved next year, and it might not be resolved the year after that. There are a lot of they were supposed to have started renegotiating that contract a year ago, and they haven't even started yet. In part because of the pandemic, and in part because of the protests. We're going to have a new mayor in a year, so that could change the entire agenda of renegotiating the police contract.
Yeah, that's an easy one to push to the back burner.
That one could take a while. As far as what the city council does, there was this sort of initial push and show of support for the defund by 50% goal. I think that has sort of slowed down, or maybe you could say has been nuanced, I suppose, by the city council. Before, I think the goal that the city council was expressing was, we want to cut the police department by 50%. Now I think the goal is something closer to, we want to build an alternative public safety system, and with the goal of replacing half of the police department, which I think are actually two very different things. And so I think what we will see this year is a lot of work and conversation around what we were talking about before, is how do we take these boutique programs and make them into real meaningful substitutes? Or how do we build new programs that can be real meaningful substitutes? And I think what we're going to find is that that's going to take a lot of work. And I don't think anyone will deny that it's going to be really difficult and slow work. So yeah, check in this time next year. It'll be really interesting to see what it does.
Yeah, we'll see where it leads. Sara Bernard is the producer of This Changes Everything. You can hear the full second season now in your podcast app. And David Kroman is Crosscut's political reporter. Thanks, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Seattle Now is produced by Clare McGrane, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.